Owl City holds the final stretch of humanity's fight for survival. The burning streets filled with smoke and screaming, while soldiers from afar lay scattered on the ground after a fierce battle where they gave everything for each other. Even when there's nothing left for him, one brave man keeps pushing forward despite every obstacle standing in his way. This guy is the one we're calling Colin Hall. So let's get started. Even the boss who thinks he's defeated him is stunned by how determined he's been. Even if the odds are completely stacked against him, he will still make it. Because Colin says this, his friend decides to give him a special chance. He'll have the freedom to choose exactly what happens next. Colin stares with wide eyes at the flickering lights, terrified that he might be watching something truly terrible unfold. A decade passed since the demons started invading Earth, and then before anyone could believe in this terrifying turn of events, the entire royal capital fell to a sudden and deadly surprise. Even the ordinary soldiers were too weak to stop the hungry monsters with magic when they tried to fight back. Before the invasion even took place, magic wasn't a free gift. It was a secret treasure only handed out to the most powerful families in their lineages. These powerful people call themselves the bloodline supremacist nobles and think they stand among the heroes ready to save humanity. But as the war began, they couldn't believe their faith in magic was all just a toddler's game for the monsters. The aristocrats stared helplessly as their crumbling defenses fell apart and their entire households were shredded in the chaos. Oh, now Colin knows he must have found the book before life ended. But fate turned against him, and everything went wrong anyway. Colin laughs and says, "You talk a lot. You're just making fun of me." Colin's sudden change shatters the very foundation of the demon. Colin has finally found a way to make that choice, even when he couldn't have started with it in his head. Colin grabs onto the ground before he can dash off at full speed toward the demon, then effortlessly blocks his own next attack with a simple block of stone. But Colin won't stop, pushing himself harder at the edge of the danger, which forces the monster to retreat and let a chance slip away. Colin finally pushed his heavy blade deep into the demon's chest, shattering him and sending him sprawling backward as he laughed maniacally at Colin's lack of skill to knock him down. Suddenly, he sees an arm break apart like glass, causing a loud scream as he realizes no one had ever been able to cut him with such blunt force. Colin admits that nothing ordinary can stop him from cutting a demon with his own two hands. Colin runs into the abyss to avoid hitting the forbidden sword, but doesn't fight for him. Instead, he finds himself surrounded by demons tearing at his soul and life force before he can even dodge. Colin fights hard because his heart beats faster than usual, giving him just enough power to win. The thief spots a crack in the wall, so fast he dives straight for the demon's wrist. He dives for the demon's second arm and hits hard, but the monster grabs his sword instead. The dark figure laughs softly and said to Colin, "If you just fired that cursed blade, maybe we could have done something clever instead." It turned out Colin missed so badly that the plan ended up failing. Colin feels shocked by the sheer power of the monster's attack, which cracked the steel from his hand and hurled him directly toward the rock wall like a cannonball. Colin groaned loudly because he was so disappointed that his final weapon wasn't enough to stop the bad guy. The demon walked right up to him and whispered, "You don't even remember where you got this cool move? You're just about to finish your life." The demon seized Colin and lifted him like nothing existed beside it, while Colin choked on regret that even with everything, all he'd taken from the villain was just his right arm. Beneath the chaos, Colin felt completely shattered and found himself doing only what he could, apologize to those who trusted him to win. A shadowy figure slashes his throat, but the darkness never stops. Instead, his lifeblood streams outward, crashing onto the floor like a roaring waterfall of red water. Surprise! His blood touches the strange, grumpy thing, and suddenly it wakes up. Colin gasps as his eyes snap open, only to discover he's still breathing somewhere deep in the dark, a miracle of survival that makes him feel like a ghost watching a living corpse. He jumped out of the strange room and heard his own voice shout, making him scramble around as if he had never been here before. The sky erupted as he screamed for someone to pull him back, and suddenly, a dusty tome drifted right into his face. Colin feels a strange urge in his chest and hears the Grimoire whisper, "I'm listening to you. I'm watching out for you." He turns around, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement as he sees the Grimoire press against him. Colin listens quietly, waiting for a moment before agreeing to the new plan, because he knows he can fix anything in his life if he just tries hard enough. Colin keeps ignoring the grimoires because he truly has no idea if they mean anything to him. As Colin sits comfortably in the seat, the grimoire guarantees a steady hand beside him forever, giving him plenty of time to learn how to use his magic on the fly. The old tome slams onto the floor like an earthquake, sending a sudden burst of bright light that makes Colin jump back, as if he was stepping into a completely different world. The moment Colin wakes up to see a faceless, scarred man wearing a mask, he knows he's in a slave yard. He grips the giant club and hears the crowd shouting as the bad guys play their cruel tricks while everyone else watches from the shadows behind him. The old man stepped forward, clutching a sword and shield to his chest, while watching the world fade into gray around him until he finally saw himself standing at the edge of the room. He swings hard, but his heavy mallet jams in his hands. The crowd, ranging from commoners to the high nobility, goes wild as they stare at the empty air where the blade would have gone down. One of the nobles turns to a supposedly important noble, Vic, Count Slaith, about how good the fight is. Slaith very often says that being a slave isn't about being useful. It's because people want to play games with everyone else so they can see how to make their own money. Then the butcher slammed his mallet down on Colin's head with such force that he almost didn't even know what happened next. A mighty thunderclap crashes down hard on the floor, sending shockwaves through the room and making everyone else go crazy for a split second. Butcher's name echoed through the arena. Yet by the moment everything settled, Colin didn't realize his friend were shocked that they'd found him still alive and confident in stepping on the butcher's weapon just for a farm. Colin had taken everything in, realizing he'd returned to the past. He sensed so much, and when he found himself holding the book instead of walking away, he immediately understood why it had merged into him. Colin finally realized he had been stuck waiting for a perfect day when, since it's here now, the world just needs to move on. The guy dropped like a rock when he got hit by the punch from the man in the red shirt. The old butcher stood right in front of Colin, ready to cut through the darkness that had swallowed everyone he knew about, because he knew better than anyone else what came next if humanity could not be saved. He suddenly realized he had no choice but to master the magic already written in that dusty grimoire, because believing he could change everything when he was just a slave only made him look even worse. Colin stared hard into the distance as he spotted Darius Hall, the powerful lord from the Rhine territory. Colin wants to step right into the marquis's door, but doing it now will be so much quicker than before when things got too hard for him. Colin stepped out of the crowd only after his master had warned him. Everyone was betting their lives on winning against the butcher, so Colin couldn't refuse that decision even if it meant failing to fight the nobles behind the scenes. Colin realized his master had just ordered him to die so he could save the noble's face. Yet secretly, he figured out that Slaith was plotting to turn that same master against them by sacrificing Colin to secure his approval for a move toward the noble house. Colin is loudly demanding they introduce a new rival so he can face them head on. At that moment, these powerful lords who had followed Slaith's instructions to gamble with a butcher were finding their fortune slipping away from them. Those who played for so long now feel cheated by how fast the match ended. Yet Slaw insists their actions were just stepping in line with the bigger scheme unfolding right in front of them. Meanwhile, Darius gets mesmerized by Colin's devastating strike that takes the butcher's head. He asks his trusted butler what he thinks about it, and the man explains it is quite phenomenal because even the Empire's greatest warriors rarely pull off moves like Colin did. Darius told his butler exactly how much fun Colin was having by sneaking into the room while Slaith tried to stop him. Soon after, a new foe steps out of the shadows and whispers to the nobles, "Forget all your worries. You're merely the one we've been using to keep Colin's world looking so fresh." Colin throws a devastating blow that tears him apart before finishing his speech. Yet he still manages to take the fight with his opponent and put his own feet on him just as confidently. The Select couldn't believe his own eyes as the nobles rushed over, shouting that they had already moved past their original plan. He's staring down that exact moment and wondering why Colin has turned around instead of obeying his orders. Slith waits for everyone to cheer while Darius watches with pure delight from every corner of his audience, laughing because he finds this battle spectacle so exciting. In Colin's old past, he thought Darius wanted everyone in the world to learn magic together, so he gave him the job. But things went wrong at that time. They failed. Now, with his new superpower, Colin is sure he can succeed on his own. His next move is to show Darius how much he cares if he wants a chance to join his family. You know, beating your rival isn't enough. He has to find something truly daring next time. The crowd rushed over when he appeared, and everyone jumped up in a huff to see what was happening. The shadows of danger swirl around Colin as he leaps up, ready to meet the inevitable end of any gladiator who steps into his path. He was busy working while everyone cheered with delight as he finally made a huge profit. A brave gladiator swings wildly on the other side, and Colin's powerful arm catches him right in the middle while he tries to throw himself forward, sending him flying through the air. The sword zips through the air with insane speed, narrowly avoiding killing Slaith by sliding right into that solid wall right behind him. As Slaith stared into the swirling chaos of Colin's humiliation, His rage was a sudden, boiling storm in his chest that made his heart hammer against his ribs like it could do nothing but burn. Colin laughs at every plan, while Seth feels like a crazy man as Colin tries to humiliate him without thinking about what's really happening in the room. Seeing how everything is played out, Darius teases Slaith about how the chess king has turned into a player while the old fisherman has become a fisherman, telling him that his plan is ruined and making sure everyone else knows it's all over because they're pissed off. They berate Darius about how he treats what's happening as not serious when he holds power over the Rhine territory. They demand to know if he will spare a lowly slave or refuse to obey, and the nobles declare that Colin must be executed, marking it as the most severe punishment possible. Darius shifts his eyes toward the gathered nobles and says, "Is this really just how they do things?" Darius's words slammed down like a rock, knocking his head against the table as he asked himself if he was still chasing those false ideals. They tell us how thousands of years ago our ancestors received spells from the supreme god and suddenly carved out a powerful, clear leadership line in the world. SLE says that by taking those magical powers, they became so many gods themselves. But instead of Darius acting like one, he is stuck clinging to these silly ideas about history. Slaith walked over to Darius and asked, "Do you have a plan for breaking the great god?" Colin jumped out of his seat to grab the glass that was already half full with coffee. Suddenly, he stepped into the crowd and asked Slaw about whatever was wrong with Darius's plan. When the nobles saw Colin sitting among them, they erupted in vomit and screamed about his stupidity. Colin then told them exactly why he was so stupid by offering to fight them instead of being treated as their god's agent. Groaning in frustration while Colin's face turns red from shame, he steps forward into the crowd to face his challenge. Even the powerful nobles know that Colin has already died long ago and won't be able to fight Slaith anymore. Darius, though distracted from his job, watched intently as fate seemed to whisper a warning before he could even blink. He whipped a spell out of thin air as he stared coldly at Colin, who had crushed his dream by hitting the altar with his head and making his entire divine plan come back to life. And then he faced him with such intense intensity that the moment his hands clutched the ancient scroll, he suddenly heard himself whispering a warning. "Don't look away from this." The realization hit him like a physical blow. His eyes locked on the pages of the grimoire, and for a split second, reality dissolved into a blur of impossible magic. And just then, a status window popped up in front of him, revealing that Slath was still barely starting out when it came to magic, and his preferred type was wind magic. His aptitude for spells was very low, while his swordsmanship level remained a beginner as well, leaving him with no resistance against magical attacks. Slaith throws a giant gust of wind that hits Colin right in the face, but he won't let go of his anger because he's going to hurt Colin again and again before even knowing if Colin can take it back. Even Darius is terrified when he sees this because wind edge can turn wind into deadly blades that slice enemies in half. Nobles have already placed a huge bet that his own body could become the next piece of armor. Slith strikes hard, but hope shows he can still teach Colin how to distinguish a noble from a slave. Despite Slath's supposedly powerful attack, Colin barely got his shirt off and didn't take any damage himself. He felt completely cheated because the spell was really just a beginner-level trick that did nothing but hurt him in ways nobody else could see. Colin laughs because his powerful magic shield caught up to him with all the force of a fist at the perfect spot. Colin laughed and threw his hands up because the magic from the demons was far stronger than anything he had ever seen. The group of nobles watched in a wave of stunned silence, wondering how a man with such raw power could delete the elite spells while darting so fast he was already on his way to kill them all. SLE seized his own blade and struck, but Colin's relentless blow slammed into him, sending him sprawling forward as he tried to regain his footing. Colin pulled back the guard and thrust his sword up to his throat, clearly signaling defeat to everyone else watching in stunned silence. Suddenly, the grimoire warns him again of an imminent magic attack. Before Colin even spots the darkness, a swirling circle of light emerges beneath his feet, and shadowy skeletal fingers suddenly pull tight on his wrists, pinning him firmly to the ground. Suddenly, soldiers clad in shining silver armor burst from the shadows as news spread of how a noble man had dared to challenge a king and insult his divine image right before battle began. Colin's power grew much more intense because his knighthood suddenly turned out to be a trap, and the knights held him so tightly inside the castle while pretending to worship their deity. Colin struggles to look into the men staring at him, only to find himself completely cornered by the god's guards. This magical tower isn't a building. It's a massive power plant where magic comes from strong bloodlines to keep everyone in line for all eternity. The god guards, hidden beneath a magical tower, are made of powerful nobles from the bloodline supremacy faction who beat them all out in strength. Despite Colin's natural ability to crack open the spell, he keeps his distance from the power so he won't draw too much focus on it before the next move. He sneezes dramatically, and suddenly Colin Hall bursts onto the stage to reveal his identity to the entire crowd. Everyone gasps in shock as they finally realize their favorite movie star's new family name. Colin trusted that the Divine Guards would never touch his noble lord, so he kept using this plan as always. He's sitting in the corner, staring at the floor and wondering what's happening behind him next time. Slaith swings his blade and aims to slash through Colin, whispering that he's saving his own skin by fighting for the world. Suddenly, Darius's voice echoed through the arena, urging Slaith to shut down whatever he was trying to do. Darius wandered to the scene, and Slaith was right. Colin was about to drop him. Darius laughed as he snatched Colin from the road, calling the guy a fool who had dragged his family name through the mud all along. They had never seen anything like it before because the gods were not surprised. Instead, they were amazed to see how this was completely different from everything else. Darius was about to crush Colin's neck with a violent shove when he suddenly stopped mid-thrust and turned around to look at him, clearly realizing his own mistake. Darius scolded Colin that he had laid his hands on Slaith while Darius was trying to play along with it. Colin thinks the gambling bet could finally come true. Darius immediately apologized to Slaith, realizing he had been so rude that his son's name got on Slaith's mind. Darius screeches at Colin for sharing a secret about what happened before he could stop, because Colin actually made it even better when they told each other how things were going off the rails afterward. Darius stepped forward toward the god guards and said loudly, "I'm not ready for this." He held out his hand as if offering a gift of freedom, promising to return with nothing but a happy family without any worries or trouble. He refuses to tell the god guards to let Colin go. Darius was pinned beneath the heavy blade of Slaith's greatsword as Slaith screamed in rage, declaring that all he really cared about was fooling around with a ridiculous act while he tried so hard to keep up. Slaith warns Darius that he won't let Colin leave the spot without a fight, because he's going to kill him right there, and Colin just blasts him back with his own words about Lord of the Rhine, missing the mark. Colonel Colin steps forward and asks the silent commander, "Sla, are you actually trying to pull the rebellion's flag higher?" Slaith felt a sinking fear as he dropped his blade to tell Colin that the plan was failing and no one was getting it right. The commander of the God Guards finally let Colin go free, declaring the situation a simple misunderstanding, while the knight exchanged apologies with Darius before leaving together. Before parting ways, the leader of the knights told SLE that he was certainly going to report on the magic tower and asked him about what they arrived at. Slaith crashed into the dirt in a guttural groan as his heart hammered against his ribs, realizing finally that he was done for. As they leave the arena, the leader of the God Guards tells his assistant to investigate Colin because he is pretty sure Colin has never heard of a mayor having a son. He knows fully well that Colin isn't Darius' son and tells them to follow him and report every move to him. Darius laughed so hard he let the carriage shake as he watched Colin strut on stage, cheering loudly and saying, "Great show." Then Colin smiles warmly at the Marquis as he offers his true thanks to everyone there. Darius found himself having to pay his butler, Cornell, because he hadn't spoken to him about the debt yet. Darius paused and asked Colin, "Have you ever seen someone fight?" Colin told the Marquis that he had been raised in a remote village where his parents never returned, forcing him into slavery when they passed. It's that moment when a noble hands his son over, not just as a child, but as a complete father figure who shares all the secrets of magic with him. Colin told the noble that his great wish was ruined because he couldn't achieve it. But this time Colin decided to live up to what he planned, revealing he was ready to risk everything just to fulfill his dreams. That statement completely knocked Darius out cold, proving that the spell from Slith's attack wasn't working because Colin had finally mastered the basics of magic. Darius notices how Colin's heart beats with such strength and uses that feeling to guess that Colin might just find his own life goals much more exciting than the usual plans he had made all along. Moments later, they walk onto the estate where Darius quickly steps forward and assures Colin it's not about slavery anymore. He says he won't live in peace or silence, even if survival of the fittest rules the world. Darius smiles at Colin with a look of serious resolve, knowing that saving his life and turning him into a great man will take more than just his strength. It's up to Colin himself to push past this next test. Right before Darius finished his sentence to Colin, who was holding the last name Hall, they realized exactly where this phrase meant. He was counting on Colin to be right there when it happened next. Colin lets out a long, relieved sigh as the hard work of the first part seems to be done. The Hall family keeps an iron grip on their own magical legacy by marrying anyone they can find, even if it means sacrificing some of their power or blood for a common person. It's so simple that nobles often think they're doing the right thing because they want to keep their magic intact and their line strong. Darius broke the rule. Despite every challenge, he kept pushing forward until finally soaring up into the highest peak and becoming the true ruler over this vast land where no one else knew him. Darius and Colin stepped out from the hallway, but Darius told Colin that nothing matters about his past. Inside their home, power was all they needed. Darius checks his watch and tells Colin that he's ready to hand him every piece of his dream life, whether it be top status, a prestigious title, or huge money, all based on how well he can actually get them. Darius laughed and promised to give him everything, which made Colin jump at him while insisting he'd only take his seat for being lord of the room if that was all he wanted. Darius laughed off the fact that his friend's questions shocked both of them, treating it as if nothing really happened. Darius gently tells Colin to rest his shoulders and wait until he feels brave enough to step into the chair. Colin didn't think much about his surprise because he knew from the very start that Darius was just another meritorious guy who loved giving everyone a chance at success. That reckless idea made him hated by his family and their enemies alike. Just as the heavy doors shut behind them, Darius' family burst through the main hall to greet him, where Free Hall was their youngest son and Katrina Williams was his sister. Catherine warmly greeted the guest, thinking everyone had waited for her. Yet Darius remained unimpressed since he hadn't informed anyone that he would be returning home. It seems like she's letting him see everything inside her without a word. Katrina is saying that people are moving news around very fast, especially after she noticed that someone in charge had trouble dealing with the slaves because a little bird flew through their air and told them about it all along. Darius didn't feel a big surprise because he knew his wife was already sending spies to follow him on the run. Even though Colin doesn't recognize Katrina yet, everyone knows she's the one standing guard over the dark world. Katrina was born with a secret life of chaos, having been made the villainous mastermind behind Darius's downfall in the old world, and now she holds everything he lost for free from his parents. So she treats her second wife just like any other woman, even though she is keeping Marcus' throne safe for her own son. Colin slipped right into her trap for the very first time, yet he knows she won't do it again. Then Colin greets his wife and daughter, introducing himself as Colin Hall. Freed almost crashed over when he heard the voice and started shouting, "Who are you?" He was stepping toward the door when his mother grabbed him and stopped him right in front of her. Katrina pointed at Cornell and asked, "How can someone as far away from the center of power as a slave ever claim that name?" Colin stands tall, while Katrina scolds his brother for doing his job poorly. But as Colin reaches out to pull a weapon on the misery, Colin reveals he inherited that surname from Darius and wants to know if his wife and son will object to this new ruling. His arrogant demeanor presses down on them like a razor blade, promising that in the future he will lead the entire territory, so everyone must bow before him. Darius couldn't help but laugh, feeling a sudden surge of joy as the anger from this scene only grew more intense in his eyes. Colin stepped into the hall, and his entire team froze in shock as he suddenly declared himself lord of the territory. Catherine couldn't handle noise, so she riled up at Colin's loud accusation that he was just a small slave before he could even start talking back. Darius intervenes when a group of butlers and servants suddenly grab Colin, insisting that every word he spoke is real after being given instructions from Katrina to take him away. Darius reveals that he's already considered Darius's territory's lord because his performance matters so much. Freed's protest turned up a new question. What has got over him? Darius's words made Katrina feel alone. She decided she had nothing left to say after he spoke. But Darius remembers how hard her own servant brothers worked just to keep their names on the ledger, and he knows only one person who earned a family title for himself. Catherine is telling Darius that the plan means many people won't really like the deal. Since this is the case, she suggests they put Colin under a test. Darius asks her what that means, while Katrina clarifies that Colin must prove his strength so everyone feels safe at home. However, if he fails, he gets forced to follow the house rules and leave in shame. Afterward, Colin interrupts by saying it isn't enough, and Freed confidently checks him out to see if he's scared of it. Colin just told everyone who wants to get ready for the exam, "Don't keep it all to yourself. Everyone needs a chance to show up and pass." Freed realized too late that Collins was pointing out a clever mistake. Everyone in that family, including Colin, had been born with some hidden talent for being funny. The news broke that Freed had been spit out for years after he never got any kind of mockery in his entire life, and everyone was shocked by such a shocking statement. Freed can't even look at those lowly servants or slaves when they stand in front of him, so he won't believe anyone will ever let him win his place as an heir. A sudden tap on his shoulder sends chaos racing through him as he thinks his life could turn upside down if he gets too worked up for the monkey. Kathleen whispers to her friend that he has the ultimate magic power, so she lets them sit back and enjoy watching from above. Despite getting angry right before the meeting, Fred couldn't refuse. He had to follow the rules of his mother's family, even if that meant making her mad. So Darius decided to go after Colin's plan, but the whole thing got decided right away that a selection test for volunteers should happen just 1 month later. Until the day of your last job at the local inn, Colin had been working as an old man's servant, just like he was doing all those years back. While walking through the dark slums of his master's yard, Cornell whispers to Colin that he sees exactly what Darius is plotting. Cornell stares blankly at the screen as Colin laughs nervously, wondering why Darius would be so hateful for holding on to those lofty moral principles. Cornell spoke up and said, according to Colin's tale, he got pulled away from her while she was still in the slave arena. But he found out about this strange news through his own connection with the Slave Association, and Cornell told him that they were taken straight from that remote village. Cornell pulled out his sword as soon as Colin arrived and began to panic, knowing that Darius had already been warned of the next threat. As Cornell lunges forward with the blade raised, he whispers softly to Colin, "You're going to be the most inconvenient thing in the room." Colin told Cornell that his logic was true, even though they both agreed it wasn't. Yet, the Slave Association seems like a team that gets busy fixing matches, even if they haven't given them a single thought about what to do next. Colin wonders how the team managed to get rid of the criminals while still keeping his job safe. Cornell pauses for a second before realizing his trademaster had said Colin could be strong on average, though the moves he actually fought demonstrated something far more powerful and perhaps above that standard. Whether in a real blade fight or an ancient spell, every great battle knows exactly where its own special level begins. Many folks crash just before they get to the middle stage, leaving only a tiny sliver for the truly gifted to push past that limit. And once you're above that threshold, you've already entered your own special world. Most high-scholarly people worry about magic and keep their swordplay at a beginner level. In those special places where gods watch over us, you need to be a pro-level expert. Cornell wondered whether a merchant had lied to him about Colin simply so he could leave. Colin noticed that Cornell was staring at him with deep doubt and then spoke up gently. "I've got something more important to say about this." Colin jokes to the effect that if he were a spy, he'd be hunting down someone who holds the power behind the throne. Colin explains that spying usually involves infiltrating a target's inner circle and grabbing their secrets before they can escape. So if a spy was about to shoot at Cornell, they wouldn't go for Darius instead. Cornell keeps stumbling over his words while Colin tries to clarify. If he steps onto the job as head butler, any chance Lord wins by attacking him is essentially just eating into his own lunch. Colin starts by saying to Cornell that they should sign up for a secret deal. If you work for them while they go hunting for the big power spies, I'll take over your job as an assistant to help find out who's watching from behind the scenes. Cornell asks him if he knows he's turning into an enemy of the other nobles by doing this, and Colin confidently says it is a situation known as high risk, high reward. In addition, if something were to happen to Darius, his dream of becoming his successor would be completely gone. Cornell listened hard, and now he knew Colin was both incredibly strong and very sharp. Colin wonders if Cornell has any other plans when he sees that the deal seems too tempting to ignore. He grabs Colin's hand as if it were a bridge over the storm of worry he was carrying, saying go, and letting him lead him directly into the warm light of his own home. It turned out that the family members got split into 3 levels after being made by Katrina. There are some very nice servants working for the big kids, including Katrina, Darius, and his own little boy. So, there's a mix of people. Some lower-class servants can't leave their houses and live right next to the big mansion, while others stay in small rooms far away because they're too scared to get near it all. Colin isn't a high-ranking officer. He's just a guy who does all the dirty work and keeps his own horses running. He earned a little more than 3 copper coins every single day to make ends meet. Cornell told him an absolute rule: never treat your boss like a servant, regardless of their attitude. Colin pauses and looks down to catch the old boys who are already hooting about their latest invention before they can start playing it together. Cornell walks out and whispers, "You told me this was a rule made by Katrina." Colin stepped out onto the floor and hugged his senior group, smiling warmly as he introduced himself and promised they would have a wonderful time together. They decided to act like douchebags instead of being nice about Colin's help. They are laughing and mocking Colin, encouraging him to think he's ready for the title of Lord. One of them stepped forward and whispered that they had witnessed a fight against the lady in the house. Well, the bad guys call out at Colin and say they're ready to teach him a proper greeting method. One of the boys pulls out a bottle and shatters it with force so he can use it as a weapon against his enemies. The guy told Colin to kneel down, but instead of shaking hands, he kept hitting him across the face and whispering that he'd be working them till they're done with it. He grabbed Colin tight on his shoulders and pointed at him as he questioned whether he understood what they had told him about him. Colin snapped his grip on the man's arm, twisting it backward just to make sure he couldn't scream any more in agony. Even after Colin kicked away his friends, he still walks up to him, telling them they can't stop hitting his face anymore and starting to slap on the side of the guy who just did it so well at first. They turned the tables and beat up Colin while he was still staring blankly at them. A man in a plastic bag speeds down the road while another pulls out a large glass jar. Suddenly, he stumbles forward, catches the second guy's arm, but then he lunges for his own weapon to smash the bottle. He held the scabbard tight and threw the long blade forward to smash it squarely against the guy sitting at the table, sending him flying to the floor while he watched in shock as his own body crumpled sideways. Colin stands there with a heavy heart as he waits for Colin's turn to get in on the punishment, knowing that the other person will be right behind him next. He was already a blur of red when Colin darted out and slammed his hand onto his chest. Colin leaned down and looked at the guy in a way that made him realize something was wrong, as he asked, "Are you finally satisfied?" before dropping to his knees to check on the man. A loud, groaning scream from the guy lets Colin know he's finally done with his problem. The guy knows Colin's bad move and doesn't want to look like the loser when that little kid hits on him. The broken bottle was his biggest blunder. He grabbed it and tried to strike Colin with a surprising attack, only to realize that was exactly what got him hurt badly. In less than 2 seconds, Colin slashes through the man, leaving him holding his hand in a moment so vivid it won't fade from memory. As Colin sits alone in the dark after retirement, he stares at the empty hallway, wondering if a miracle has truly come true or if life is just too dangerous for him to lose his mind over. So he decides to practice his magic anyway and does not want to slip up again. Katrina was so angry that she dumped all the Hall family servants into her own staff when she married Darius, making it feel like they went from being incompatible to becoming enemies one by one. Cornell stepped forward like a giant protector, choosing to stay and guard Katrina's back while everyone else got lost. Well, Cornell holds the key to getting rid of everyone else from Katrina, so she could decide who really deserves to inherit her place. But when Cornell died in Colin's past, that tragedy actually made Katrina rise to the top of the line and become the new leader. Colin knows if his life had been changed by Cornell's death, things wouldn't have ended the way they did. Yet, Colin is deeply worried because he only has beginner-level magic resistance, forcing him to seek a spell that can handle both offense and defense against any threat. Colin felt a terrible jolt at the top of his mind and groaned as the scary spell from the Grimoire started pouring right out of him. It felt like the air itself was getting sucked into him with biting strength. Everything around him seemed to be turning black as he plunged his whole life into a pool of molten stone. Your voice is ringing in the back of your mind, urging you to act while filling up your thoughts with ideas about what you should be doing instead. Colin feels a sudden chill as the clock ticks past, realizing he has finally hit his personal ceiling. Despite not being completely mad at him for knowing that noble families can buy everything they want out of their bloodline, Colin's smile fades into a sad, resigned frown. Surprisingly, this offers a chance to ignite his fiery spirit since he genuinely wants to beat everyone, even the powerful nobles. It took a lot of pushing for Colin to finally knock him out. On a fresh start, Colin climbs down from his office and sees that his senior friends have already been busy with their tasks. He teased them for waking up so early, thinking they'd storm into his room at night, while their servants couldn't even stammer a single word because they hadn't had a chance to wait out the whole ordeal from last night's fight. Colin laughed and smiled because he knew his friends were so lucky not to get hurt after all the trouble. Colin stared frantically at the status bar, gasping for air as he suddenly knew he had cracked open a door that never truly existed. Yet his blade remained sharp like a diamond, while magic in his hands was still just a tiny spark on a small flame. When Cullen smiled, he knew his hard work had paid off every single time. Cullen yawns in a carefree mood after an exhausting training session, ready for anything delicious. His seniors are furious but can't stop them from staring at him. Meanwhile, the guard corps marches down to the quarters and immediately bows their heads to both the guards and their bald-headed leader, the vice captain. The servant was rushing to get water for his job and missed the moment when the guard showed up before he even saw them. The guard grabs him by his throat while he tries to push off the curb, shouting orders from his side so he can finally walk away without getting stuck in traffic. Oh, that was a rough ride. The heavy bag of water spilled all over the captain's sneaker before we could even get to work. The servant bowed low and begged the captain for forgiveness after realizing he had been taken back by something he hadn't been looking at all along. The captain made himself a very nice cup to kneel down in front of the man, saying nothing about why he doesn't blame him. A guy sprinting toward a bar is about to celebrate leaving after escaping trouble when a man named Baldy interrupts, shouting, "You want your eyes back because they're broken?" Without a moment of hesitation or mercy, he tore open the servant's eyes with the most bloody brutality imaginable. Oh, the other servants are like a quiet crowd watching the prince from far away, They can't even do a single thing for the rest of their lives. The overly firm guard once said to his subordinates, "Get down and kneel. Don't stare at me." Everyone was rushing along in line, while Colin wandered off, completely unaware of what was happening right behind him. The guy with missing fingers had been glaring at Colin for hours, making him feel like a joke when he suddenly noticed someone eating pizza while Colin was staring blankly at the table. He says Colin snapped his fingers to sever his arms, then turns to the captain and whispers, "You know, he's definitely a regular guy." The captain decides instead to summon Colin when he hears that guy with no arms. He casually turned around to ask Colin about the plan for cutting off their hands. Colin hears a loud crash and sees the guy back off, saying his friends aren't like those two tough guys anymore. The guards immediately pulled out their blades and marched up to Colin, demanding he cut off his arm while simultaneously offering him a choice. Let him keep his hands or lose them forever. The captain took a different path to tell Colin that they were simply not trying to fight people like him. And instead of dealing with someone else, Colin has to find out who his old friend is, the former master of the slave arena, Dak, because Dak is actually just a mid-level guard corps reserve and isn't quite as famous as they thought. He was genuinely shocked when a meeting took place right after all these years because they had always been so close friends back then. Colin knew he had already been beaten by the guards while watching him face the fight, and now he figured out that the injuries on his own body were nothing compared to what happened before. Colin asks Dak if he'll fight for the rank of captain, but Dak firmly holds his sword at Colin's side and insists on keeping the servant-to-servant and junior-to-senior order intact. He tells Colin that breaking this rule would mean being punished. Dak feels a heavy weight on his shoulders as Colin asks him if he can stop complaining about the terrible treatment. It's not just a question. It's a massive emotional burden that knocks him over, making it almost impossible for him to respond in time. Dak stays frozen while Colin rushes by, yanking his weapon from his belt. In that split second, he lunges for the captain's shoulder and slices through his chest with a quick, sharp swing of the blade. The guards were completely frozen, screaming with a mix of fear and disbelief as they stared at Colin's sudden entrance into the room. Dak stared blankly as Colin slipped by so fast he nearly grabbed his blade mid-flight. The captain wears a heavy sword around his neck and keeps shouting at Colin, pretending to be in charge while Colin asks how much he really cares about who he actually is. A tough guy drops a bombshell to Freed. He wasn't just picked as his ally. He's made someone else's fierce foe if they try to hurt him. Colin looked around nervously because his servants were staring at him in a very strange way, which made him decide to step back from there. The captain said, "I think my bluff was good, so I told Colin he couldn't leave scot-free." He has a task ahead of him that forces his frustration toward Colin before the storm passes. Suddenly, the guards sliced Dax in two with their blades to punish his failure. As if it wasn't enough, they still stabbed Dax's hand with a blade while whispering that he had squandered the chance to prove his value. They mocked him about Dax's behavior, making Colin angry until he tore his head off with a sharp swing. Then the captain stepped up from behind and whipped him hard, sending him flying into the air for a few seconds before landing safely on the ground. But Colin shoots out a blade in one motion before he can even stop himself from moving forward. Dak will tell him the sword isn't coming from him again this time, but his head. Dak arrives exactly when Colin decides to start teaching him how to swing, only for the ball to fall back into his own hand instead. Colin gets stunned by how hard Colin was blocking, which makes him ask himself if Dak really still helps even after all that chaos. Dak pushes Colin back just as the wounded man tries to tell him to stop committing more crimes, feeling his heart skip while Colin quietly convinces the captain that this will never happen again. Colin tells the guards to disappear and then asks Dak why he's licking their feet even though they're stronger than him. Dak turns around to tell Colin that he's finished for sure since he shouldn't have disobeyed the captain. So Dak explains that he has no obligation to tell Colin because he's about to die too. Dak swings his long sword and says, "Hey, I can keep it because it's actually cursed." Later on, the captain kept punishing Dak not out of appreciation for his bravery, but because he had saved his entire life just to save his own from drowning in a watery jar. A guy sees the other man apologize and gets sent flying down like a pile of dirt. A guard questions the captain about letting Colin be free, yet he admits he won't do it anyway. The captain warns his subordinates. Colin is now declaring war against the elite servants, and you must let him know right away. This will help us remove him from their service entirely. But even when Colin couldn't wrap his mind around Dak's stubborn refusal to fight, he wasn't done yet. Shortly after everyone gathered around their seats, the most elite of the staff ate up the finest dishes, while those in the middle rank shared a generous bite as well. Colin walked in with a hunger so strong he needed someone to eat trash, yet the servant who was supposed to serve said no, right then and there. Even grabbing the plate for Colin made Colin laugh as he returned his bowl back to the fire. Colin spun around, watching as his invisible friend stared back with eyes full of confusion and surprise. He found a way to shock people instead of fighting them. "Oh no, He walked right through the line of low-ranking stewards and headed straight into the elite dining hall reserved for the very top of the hierarchy, sending everyone else off their feet. Colin walks into the dining room with a sharp push, knocking his way out of his way so he can finally see what's happening. The maids don't even stop to ask him if they're okay. They just rush over and start moving the table across the floor right away. As Colin rushes over to the dining table to steal his meal, a dozen servants swarm around him, shouting questions about exactly why he's running for this. Colin stands there while Cornell arrives, shouting about being stuck in a kitchen full of servants. Despite Colin not even noticing that they're eating right now, everyone else wants him punished so quickly. Cornell realized that things were about to turn sideways unless he dealt with them quickly. So he settled that the whole thing was just a slip-up because Colin wasn't sure how to navigate himself yet. Cornell gently told Colin to stay behind so he could leave alone, while his servants looked on with mixed disappointment because they had expected punishment for not following him. Cornell asks Colin if he forgets the rule of absolute obedience, but Colin admits he does. Yet when reminded that Darius promised reward for their skills and how things truly stand, he feels strong enough to deserve a proper meal. Just then, Cornell told him he had already signed up for the deal long ago and promised to keep helping him get ready all day from now on. Cornell is hoping to get Colin back to the house so he can find that spy who's been hiding away. Moments after seeing the hunt signal, Colin stumbles upon it, prompting Cornell to wonder how Darius managed to arrive at dawn just for those reasons. Cornell announced that dark rumors were circulating near their camp as they planned a new hunt for strange beasts. When he heard about the mysterious mission within the gloomy forest, Colin jumped into action right away and found himself instantly hooked up to everything. Soon after, Colin stumbled into a dark, misty forest where he hunted his prey down by himself with an axe. He sneaked into the bushes and fired 3 arrows at once, hitting the deer with surprising speed in one go. Colin steps out of the bush after cutting a deer and grabs its head to see what's happened. He's stunned when he discovers something strange deep in the heart of a deer. Apparently, monsters turn their raw power into necklaces, yet the grimoire says these same things can also turn your magic into potions and cool tools that boost your skills. The monster's kind matters more than its power level when deciding how strong the core really becomes. He looked down to see his hand was resting on something low, so he didn't have to worry about burning out or wasting energy just because it's getting too good. Colin was nervous before stepping into the woods, telling Cornell that he'd been watching for an anomaly at night since then. Now, they're all locked up except for those few guards and the high-ranking men. Even when Colin found another way into that door, he kept telling himself he was safe because he was right behind the guard corps. Dak appeared right as Colin was scrambling inside a deer's hide to find him gone. Dak couldn't believe his eyes as he watched Colin stand over the deer, realizing that no nobles or even some high-ranking servants were supposed to have the right to take it. Colin turns his anger into a fight and grabs his sword instead of complaining about it. Dak watched Colin thrust his blade toward a startled deer and felt so sure he had just fixed the mystery by making it look like Colin himself was the monster, even though he knew that couldn't be right. Dak yelled furiously at Colin and told him that his logic was completely broken. Colin didn't even spend a single minute waiting for Dak to finish his work, yet he was already feeling frustrated because the silence between them had lasted too long. He makes a bitter excuse blaming Cornell for accidentally pairing himself up with Colin, even though he's still baffled by why the butler was so stunned when he just did it. Dak stood alone in the quiet room, while Colin suddenly burst in with an invitation. He'd been assigned a task by Cornell and was offering to prove it with his dagger. Basically, they're heading out to hunt down the suspects so they can help Darius investigate and make sure their supplies don't run out during the job. Dak can't even imagine the terrible fate he's landed in after being thrown into that pile of troublemakers. Dak quickly decides to put down his gun and focus entirely on the mission ahead of him. Moments later, Dak decides to shred his deer's meat right at his door, ready to pack everything back home while secretly hoping that one day he might be officially recognized as a member himself. Before anyone else could even realize what was happening, Colin had already started grilling the meat, unaware that it was about to become his own personal treasure. Dak froze in shock when he saw Colin grilling meat, then argued back because the food was meant for Darius and his family. Colin thrusts his mouth open wide and snaps the big piece of meat in half, yelling, "It's not going to hurt. I know you're scared." Dak nods and lets go of the meat as he tells him to share a little bit too. Dak tried to push the offer away while Colin reminded him that he's only getting a bite every 3 days. The other guy jokes to him about the punishment for taking his gun and says you'll be in trouble no matter what you decide. Colin decides to make up for the lack of food by offering a meal, which means Dak can now take on the job and keep his family safe while avoiding any trouble if he ever shares this secret with others. Dak feels a sudden tug in his chest as he nearly slips past his guard when he pushes the meat right up to his face. Dak snaps back instantly to grab that massive piece. He runs to a corner to pounce on the meat like a dog, while deluding himself that what he is doing is for the good of the family. With the way Dak is eating, Colin could see that he is starving, and he uses the opportunity to ask him why he is always doing whatever the other guards ask him to when he's clearly stronger than they are. Dak replies that being strong doesn't mean anything because devotion to their god grants them nobility, and he hopes he will be reincarnated as a noble in his next life. He reveals that he worked really hard to become a mid-level servant, so his little sister living in the countryside could have a brother that she is proud of. Colin is shouting in frustration because he feels his efforts are being wasted. Dak admits he doesn't understand why Darius is a meritocrat, yet he thinks it's all luck. They're just servants who must do their job so hard without questioning anyone else. Cullen pulled his hood up, letting out a breath of air before turning to look at the man who had been watching him with a mixture of awe and fear as the powerful figure began to dance in front of them. Dak says the matter isn't serious enough for him to take a big risk with 1 or 2 spells, so he decides to push forward anyway. Colin then shocked the boy, prompting him to ask, "What would you do if you could actually use magic?" Dak instantly snaps his gaze back to Colin, staring with an intense look as he asks, "Can I use my magic?" They are waiting for someone far away to speak before they even start talking. The loud screech was not meant to be heard by anyone. It came directly from a patrol of guardmen in the middle of battle, as they fiercely defended their pack of fire wolves. Glenn is stuck in a tight spot because the team has been shredded by so many wolves that he isn't even sure why he's fighting them. But he manages to stop the beast from attacking and then sniffs it off with a quick slash. Suddenly, a sudden wave of panic seized him as the wolves surged around him. Just as his heart was about to collapse under them, bolts of light tore from the sky and sliced off every wolf in sight before he could react. He knew his hero's true friends were Colin and Dak before he even saw them. Colin notices the fire-breathing wolves, which cost him thousands to keep alive, so he decides that killing just one might be enough to earn a comfortable life. And the wolf's heart? It beats with such raw power. Colin takes the time to think carefully before running toward the group, ready to spot each one and grab their hidden cores for sure. Colin's heart skipped a beat as he saw that gliding into the pack before it could even move. To his right, Glenn watched with eyes wide and surprised, knowing Colin had already won the battle by sheer speed. Colin pulls the trigger and shoots several shots to make sure they all fall apart. A lone wolf charges at Colin from behind, only for him to dodge the blast, as Colin finds it strange that his true self, clearly different from what he sees, is still being attacked. The terrifying beast howled its way over Colin's shoulder as he charged forward with surprising speed, instead of stopping before it could reach him. The animal kicked his leg so violently it bounced off and sailed straight past him, startling everyone in the room. The wolf hesitated as Colin fired another sharp arrow right through its back, leaving it completely stunned before fleeing. They saw Colin as the real danger and rushed to his side, leaving Glenn unable to speak while the pack tried to crush him, even though Colin was just playing tricks on them. A fierce wolf charges at Colin, sending waves of fire crashing into him, while Colin ducks in midair and shoots arrows before lunging again to crush it with his foot. After the chase, Colin laughs and then watches as an arrow strikes directly through his own head from behind. Dak had a miraculous plan. He instantly stopped the fight right when Colin was about to push the door wide open, saving the day in the process. The guy's face lights up when Colin winks and gives a big thumbs up for a job that goes very well. With this move, both of them clear away the wolves, and Glenn praises their skill before asking where they actually serve. Dak replies they might not be direct subordinates, but they do serve Darius. He introduces himself as a reserve guard member, while revealing that Colin is just a lowly servant, all of them purposefully working under Cornell's orders to provide backup. Glenn and his crew were completely stunned by the news of their own situation. Even Glenn's brave men feel their bravery was wasted when they never saw a hero save them. While everyone else was wasting time on useless talk about trash, Colin was secretly grabbing the monster cores and soon realized he'd found the real one. The wolf's core had a middle rank among them. Colin thinks he can pull off what he needs if he sticks strictly to the rules in the magic book, and everyone agrees it's a smart plan. Suddenly, the towering giant in the squad's helmet shouted sharply at Colin, demanding exactly who had given him the right to grab the beast. Glenn rushes to the door, while Darius is still holding on to Colin, saying gently that they need to get the monster away from him right now. The guy who calls Colin a brat didn't want Colin's heart to slip away from him, for Colin remembers exactly how that insult made his entire life happen. The guy snaps out of a run-on and only holds back against Glenn and Sarah because they are too strong for him to break through alone. Colin isn't a newcomer to the trio. He actually remembers them all from when they were in his old life. Apparently, the trio and Cornell stood shoulder to shoulder with Darius as his most trusted allies. It was a dark secret story where they had to hide from the forest while searching for something, and then suddenly lost everything forever along with their very own power. Colin feels so relieved after turning his life around and changing how his friends will meet in the end, knowing it means keeping them safe from all the trouble. Dak rushes forward to help calm down when Marvin keeps getting mad, since the team's new member hasn't seen the rules yet and needs the crew to stay relaxed while they figure it out. Sarah made a mess at Dak, shouting that he'd never leave until she told him to. Glenn heard Colin had suddenly turned into a new guy, and that moment made him realize his own power. Now he's the one who dared to make Katrina think she could be Lord. Glenn knew Colin was tough and ready to make a mess of things, so he didn't need to tell him anything else about what he would do when he got back. Colin leaned in and said, "You're telling me we have to go out there with this mission, right? But you've got to be kidding about what I did." A sudden blizzard sweeps through the clearing, leaving everyone exposed. But when the storm finally breaks, the King of the Flames appears, and his massive pack rushes forward to protect everyone else. The team panicked instantly because it was so clear the King of the Flame Wolves had absolutely nothing to do with what was going on in front of them. It got much worse when the king brought in a whole army of soldiers, and suddenly one wolf lunged straight at Glenn. Glenn froze mid-sentence, his eyes widening as the crowd began their sudden stamping down on him. Colin rushes over and says, "Oh God, I'm sorry, but I don't know who you are." Colin simply smiled and told the man that he had finally saved his life once more. Colin dives into the Wolf King's guard like a shadow before reality catches up to him, but his sword just whips aside instead of tearing it apart. He finds himself pushed back by a force too strong for one man alone, and realizing he can't beat the beast with just a blade, he knows his plan is doomed. Seeing how he was pushed back, Sarah and Glenn asked Colin if he was okay, because the Wolf King was such a tough boss with defeated millions of soldiers behind him. The wolves just locked up the team before the news even hit them, and Marvin gasps as his boss asks why they aren't doing more when dealing with the normal wolves is already causing trouble, only to find that someone else is now shooting straight at their brains. And just as Colin said, he told Marvin he didn't have to fear the regular flame wolves because they were all just puppets being played by the king. Colin tells us that those fiery wolves only listen when their king commands them. Without a command, they just run away and do nothing but chase the leader into the dark. Glenn gasps as Colin suggests they storm the palace, and even Dak backs him up, telling him there's nothing like defeating a king you've never seen in person. He lets Colin know his sword is broken because the fight feels like too much trouble. Colin insists he's got a game plan and won't let the team think they're quitting unless they actually get it right. Glenn and Sarah have no choice but to fight over everything because everyone knows that path leads nowhere else. Although Sarah worries about getting stuck in a dozen flaming wolves, she understands that they are here for the best reason, to get close enough to see the king. Colin bursts into the room and says, "Don't worry about doing this yet. There's a big chance of something happening just as fast as this." Just then, the Wolf King let out a loud roar that carried an intimidating presence. This turned out to be an order from the king to tell his underlings to attack the team. Glenn urged his men to storm back, but Colin quietly told them to stay back so he can get close enough to lure the wolves in. Colin barks at Marvin, demanding to know who has the power to issue orders, while Glenn gently tells him to relax and not waste their precious moment fighting each other until they can work together properly. Just then, Colin said to Dak, "Follow me." But Dak didn't know what to do. He looked at Colin with wide eyes and wondered why he was asking him so seriously about being a big brother before his sister could even see them. Dak remembers his precious sister Erica when Colin spoke so loudly that her heart broke. The pack of wolves charges into the arena, and as Colin watches, he commands the team not to try to dodge. Instead, the hunters must wait for an opening where they can use their skills together, specifically when Glenn can blind them with his sword's magic before they reach their target. He followed the instructions perfectly, and when the wolves went totally blind, Colin screamed at Marvin to slam them down with a thunderous slash of his own hand's reach. Marvin dives down to catch the first wolf before exploding upward, sending every single one flying away in a mighty shower. Colin had already thought out his next move and gently told Sarah to clear the way using that elusive phantom sword. Sarah keeps her hand on Colin's belt as she cuts right through the pack of wolves while the tall man watches with pure delight at how he already knows every wolf's tricks perfectly. Sarah steps forward as Colin launches himself toward her, and then he immediately calls out to Dak so she can catch up with him. Sarah laughs at Dak and calls him a puppy, telling him he won't fail. As they sprint toward the Wolf King, Dak asks Colin, "What's your plan?" Colin replies, "He never lets enemies get close before charging, but if we do charge anyway, he'll probably be too shaken to fight." Dak still isn't sure what Colin means when he says that. Dak is laughing as Colin lets go of his grip and tells him not to try to smash the king with a single blow, for swords are just one weapon in this fight. Dak suddenly clicked open his eyes and realized instantly that Colin was whispering something dangerous about summoning a flame wolf to attack him. Without hesitating, Colin tapped his monolines to prepare for the magic he was about to unleash. Colin gathers his ice flowers and fires them at the Wolf King when everyone else has already moved into position. Dak stared dumbfounded as his friend Colin admitted to using a spell, and suddenly felt like the whole world had turned upside down. The first wave hit hard, and Colin bounced back with a grin, nudging the Wolf King gently to see what's left on his mind about the next move. The Wolf King stands firm like a rock, yet that solid foundation suddenly pulls him off center, forcing Dak to scramble forward instead of staying put. The Wolf King turns to look at him as he runs for cover from a lion attack. Colin nudges Dak, making sure he holds onto that pressure tight until the moment feels right. Colin is desperately trying to save the day while the wolf struggles under pressure. He rushes to craft a mighty strike that will slice the Wolf King right down the middle of its soul. As the impact begins, the beast's terrifying rage cascades outward across every inch of its body like a living blade, slicing through it from head to toe in an instant. This moment where the pack finally overcomes the wolf means the other members instantly flee in panic. Dak was so stunned that he couldn't hold back a huge smile, because Colin actually does have some real magic. Glenn and his crew burst out, bowing deeply to thank Colin for slaying that scary beast. Marvin was so amazed by the victory and felt his heart skip when Colin quietly told him the plan worked and didn't even think about what might have gone wrong if they hadn't come along. Sarah gasped as the ice shattered on the ground, her eyes locking onto a spot where Colin's fingers were twitching, even though everyone else was staring at something far more sinister. When Marvin burst into laughter at the news about Colin, he pointed to Darius and smiled sadly, reminding everyone that they were all just starting their lives as teenagers. Sarah told everyone that once they were the Liony Heart Knights, led by Darius, but now those who remain are called Elite Knights. After Darius's order fell apart, Sarah dunks on him again and calls him the old hag's dog, leaving Dak wondering what she means. Dak stares at the table as Sarah tries to answer why he lost it, but she never gets a reply. Marvin whispered gently into Dak's ear, sharing the sad secret that Sarah treats Katrina like an old hag because she knows it well. It is now a stone abyss where Dak feels his heart stop beating because someone daringly called a lady in the house a hag, and he can't believe it was true. The two are quickly getting mad because Sarah looks like either a woman or a pretty little girl, depending on when she's been alive. Colin watched the two men rummaging through their pockets while he thought back to a perfect time when all things were going well with Dak. Suddenly, the cool vibe killer Freed bursts onto the scene shouting, "What's happening?" Everyone hit their faces with shock as the sudden appearance made them realize it wasn't an accident. So Dak and his team immediately gathered to kneel down while Freed claimed they had rushed in just in time for the chaos. Suddenly, he looked around for the missing flame wolves and asked Glenn what had happened. Dak and Colin came to help Glenn as he searched through the woods when suddenly a pack of wolves took over, but they didn't need them. They just needed the brave folks nearby who saved them all along. Freed finally noticed that Colin was already standing in the doorway. Colin had spent days gathering the monster cores until Freed finally stepped in and stopped him from going anywhere. As soon as Glenn spoke, he told his friend about how talented both Dakota and Colin were, so he decided they should tell their parent who headed the family's team. When Freed heard the news, he instantly knew that his position would slip away from the throne if Collins also learned about his father's success. Dak hops out of the shadows as Freed's heart begins to race, but he doesn't see anything else until a wild thought instantly strikes him, leaving the man with no choice but to stare at the empty room. Freed stepped forward toward the dark, pointing out to Dak that bringing low-ranking servants into the wilds was a serious breach of law, so he turned on him and scolded him hard for making a scene. Colin cut in, revealing that Dak is far superior to the spoiled brat he was trying to impress, for the latter has no idea how to act or cry at all without freaking out about his mom. Colin finally looked at Freed and told him he was a failure in the usual way. Sarah nearly falls over laughing as she hears this, while Freed snaps out of his stupor, begging Colin what exactly he's talking about. Continuing with a grin, Colin tells Freed that he doesn't need anyone to kneel before them because they just think he's cool or something. Colin stepped into the room and told everyone he had no idea what she meant by just being a lady because she knew her mother was a countess. Nobody believed him, not even the guard or servant who'd seen him all day. Colin sneered at him like he was playing a game of chess against kings who don't know what they're doing. "That's the only way," he said, his voice cracking with mock authority as he pointed out that no matter how high he goes in this world, his family is still more important than any dragon or queen. Freed shouted back at Colin, "I have the power to take you out of here in a second. You're just as bad at it as me." Colin looked up, surprised by that bold statement, before he also agreed with Freed's words. Colin mocks the elder even though he doesn't know where to find her. When his heart breaks, he screams into his blind spot, only then finding his mother and shouting, "I'll get you there." He suddenly snaps out of the madness and shouts, "Colin, get down!" Suddenly, masked men appeared on the scene, and Colin was instantly handcuffed while one of them reached out to stab him in the throat. Sarah and her squad recognized the team that had just made their appearance. Sarah stared into the room as she saw a group of deadly assassins, but she didn't know who they were until she realized they were just Katrina's family members keeping them safe. The terrifying presence of these killers made even nobles shiver at the thought of their names, which left Sarah completely shocked that Katrina had let her son's life go to such frightening lengths. It was right then that Glenn lay down on the floor and begged Freed not to panic, as Colin and Dak had been sent from Cornell to help them investigate. Freed jumped up and stormed toward Glenn, shouting about how they both hated each other and demanding a fight. Glenn's speech got stuck mid-sentence, leaving him stammering as he spoke. Colin watched as the whole situation unfolded and immediately told Glenn that he wasn't going to let anyone in. Darius took his seat, but he didn't know where to go. He heard him saying leave and asked for the final numbers before anyone else could arrive. Oh wow. Sarah suddenly realized she was the one who'd been helping Colin get away from this trap. Sarah stepped forward, knowing she had to back down quietly because neither of them could make up for the mistakes they made in the first place. Glenn took Colin's advice, but he quickly stepped back to let Freed take the lead, proving that his own courage helped him win. The guy named Freed laughs at Colin, saying his whole world has fallen into someone else's arms while he stands alone there. Colin laughs at him while he tries to calm down after hearing that he needs to get back up and finish his job without making any excuses. He gave his very best smile every day, telling him he finally had the perfect idea and was going to call him right away. Dak grabs his weapon from the table, and suddenly he knows what to do next when the man orders him to grab it and take out Colin. So when he did that, he'd go mad and forget every single thing he's ever done. After a month before the war began, Colin and his friend Dak got locked up in prison with the Orc King, who then turned out to be very funny. The Orc King orders Colin to strike down Dak with his bare hands, demanding that he release the remaining prisoners if Dak isn't killed this way. Colin grabbed the sword and suddenly found himself facing a decision with more than 100 people at risk against a trusted friend. When Colin steps into Dak's arms, the man begins to tear up, recounting how a young daughter had been lost and leaving him to care for her alone. Darius pulled his arm out of Erica's hand while she watched as she vanished from the room, only to find herself walking alone toward the Williams estate, her own heart beating fast against her ribs. Dak wanted to hope his sister stayed safe wherever she went, but he also shouted to Colin to make sure she wasn't hurt when the big news finally landed on him. The boy is telling Colin that his sister's heart is too hard for any kind of generous cooking, so he tells him not to spoil her. Dak also begged Colin to reveal the secret of becoming a true knight so he could finally tell his sister about it. Colin watched the tragic tale unfold and felt a deep sorrow that made him wish he had not heard what was truly sad about it. In today's world, we've swapped our positions. Colin is now standing at the receiving end of that deadly sword. Dak looked awkward as Freed watched his confused expression, so Freed asked, "Why are you doing this?" Dak thinks killing Colin wouldn't work unless Colin was already gone, so the game feels like a nightmare where he has no one left to protect. Freed heard the story and immediately stepped into Dak's inner world to tell him exactly what Erica's heart was going through when she finally found out her brother had left for someone else entirely. Dak and Freed were fighting over whether they could ever be friends again. And Ferrier talked about how Erica was gone for a while, and the news came too late to change anything. Erica watched in horror as the sun went down and she collapsed, realizing her starvation was actually feeding a much bigger hunger than it looked like. The world feels like a heavy blanket around Dak, who's now completely unable to hear the noise at all, while his friend Freed insists he won't be handling Erica because he doesn't think he can follow the rules set for her. Dak crashes down onto his hands and knees, desperately pleading with Colin before Freed finally makes the call. If you want her safe, shoot him. Just as Colin burst out laughing like a maniac, Freed went confused and asked who was making fun of him, but Colin answered with an arrogant smile that said he could never be beaten by anyone else. Colonel Colin is trying to convince Colonel Fred to let his two best friends go on an intense brawl so they can get away with it. Colin convinced Freed that watching the dog simply groan was way worse than leaving it to do it all by itself. Freed had to stare at the moment of absolute zero for a long time before he finally understood. If there was no threat left, why fight? So instead of saving himself, he shouted orders to the assassins to let Colin go so that they could fight each other rather than letting him win. Once free, Colin swings his blade down hard to cut through the guard of Dak, sending him flying in a startled cry. Dak stares at the screen and thinks about whether Colin is actually serious or if he's just putting on an act for today. Fred flicks a spark near Dak's freezing face, whispering to him that he must stay warm so his sister isn't hurt. Colin swings a blade so hard his face hits the ground right behind him. Dak only narrowly escaped the hit and flew backward as Colin's sheer power slammed him into his own ground. Colin keeps shooting and leaves Dak stunned, telling him he doesn't have any other option than fight back because he's not going to let anyone kill him. When Dak heard the news, his heart raced as he finally found his footing on the field. He instantly snapped back at Colin by forcing him to retreat. Colin was so excited about winning in just 3 moves that he told Dak it was all over, and Dak took it as an insult, shouting that he didn't need any time at all, only 3 seconds. 2 of them pause and look at each other quietly before moving forward together. The 2 men were drawn together by the tension in the air, with Colin quietly whispering to him so that Dak wouldn't lose hope about their shared history. As the heavy steel shutters sealed up on the sword hilt, Dak paused, letting the silence of the battlefield hang between them like a curtain before he finally looked at Colin's words again. It turns out Colin's words mean a lot to him. Once they know who knows what, they stop fighting and start talking instead of hurting each other. Just as both unleashed a mighty slash, they unleashed a whirlwind of light that blinded everyone. But Freed was completely stunned, while suddenly Colin appeared above him, lunging toward him with his sword. But Freed swung at Colin and threw a magic ball that caught him right off the ground. Colin's heart skipped a beat when he saw Freed's hard look, because he knows this tough guy won't stop unless he gets real. He charged forward and punched Colin right through the air before letting go, yelling at him to stop underestimating his power. Freed yells, and the killers see him go. He felt furious and slammed his hands in the ground, launching a burst of pure power that sent Dak flying backward so hard he nearly hit the floor. At the same time, the grimoire warned Colin, who then found himself realizing how tangled up everything had become in a single moment. Freed looked at Colin with a curious look as he checked his stats in the status window, wondering if his mid-level magic could actually do what he needed next. The system keeps warning him about Freed's attack, because even though his sword skills are just getting started and his magic resistance feels like an intermediate skill, he can't take any damage from a new threat yet. Colin is stunned by what happens next, but he won't let a single step happen while he's still alive, so instead, he dives into the fight to see if he can prove his worth before he dies. Fred got mad because Colin was showing off his strength. Fred yelled at Colin, saying, "You're going to be a burden." Freezing the air with his lightning strike, Colin immediately turns away to block the attack. That loud bang of the fireworks scattered every little bit of dust in the air. Fred jumps back in terror as the man staring at him realizes something far more terrifying than a spell. The old man isn't holding any power. He's just trying to talk to Colin again. And for once, it feels like they're playing a game of hide-and-seek where the game ends instantly. He couldn't shake the feeling of standing right next to a wall full of icy pieces, making his mind go completely blank. Colin steps forward confidently as the dust settles, holding a few light cuts, but smiling down at Freed, who laughs in disbelief about his work. Even the best of the guards couldn't believe Colin actually made it through the chaos. Freed stared at the evidence as Colin kept trying to hide a simple truth. They were definitely using magic, which made it seem like an impossible lie. He refuses to trust that the slacker Colin even holds any superpowers, so he's ready to unleash his bigger, more powerful spell. Colin stands ready to stop the incoming threat, yet the book insists he's out of mana before he can even cast a spell. As Colin dropped to his knees in the dark, he knew with complete certainty he had lost everything. Yet before even a second passed, a bolt of Fred's lightning struck him from behind. Colin screams in agony as the thunder rips through his nervous system, causing him to question whether he's just going to lose all hope for trying again. With every step forward, Colin dives deeper into a frantic search for any last piece of strength he might have lost. The grimoire spotted him and gently nudged the man away from the forbidden zone, warning him that trying to cast spells without enough mana could push him over the edge into madness. Colin keeps staring at the wall and ignoring every sign that someone wants to kill him, because he can't even stand the thought of dying again. He pushed himself as hard as possible, and suddenly, a dark fog filled his mind, turning him into a cyborg. Colin grips his helmet tight as the numbers shoot up past the ceiling, leaving only black spots on the screen that make every other character wonder if he's actually being measured or if magic just turned upside down. He throws his hands up in frustration, realizing he can't fight anymore, and simply lets the magic die out on him instead of trying to stop it. Freed gets caught in the trap when Colin lunges at him. Freed stands his ground while Colin charges forward. Colin swings wildly with his sword, nearly slicing Freed's skull alive while he barely escapes. Yet he keeps chasing him all along. Fred dodges once, and his horse is sent tumbling to the ground as Colin's rage hits hard again. Fred tries so hard to go back fast that he nearly trips over his own feet before catching himself on the edge of a ledge, only to see Colin look completely tired and stop trying to help him. Freed decides to use the deal for his own gain. He's cooking his lightning shield, but Colin tries to cut it with that rabid dog-like speed and snaps. Colin bursts into the air with a grin, so wide he's nearly flying, while Freed catches him midair instantly and sees himself reflected in the sky above. As Colin's blade was poised to slice through the air, a shimmering golden shield materialized right beside him to block whatever hit its path. Freed saves Colin by pushing him backward so he can turn around and show his father the truth. Darius scolded the two because he knew they were in a real hunting ground, not an arena. They might wait until they finally make it back to the house if they truly want to fight right now. As Darius made his way to the scene and found himself already secure, Colin finally yielded completely and passed out from exhaustion. On some quiet afternoons, Colin slumps into bed and immediately realizes he's turned into a cyborg. For once, nature doesn't seem to be the master of things anymore. In his panic, he leaps from the bed to pull himself together, then lets out a sigh of relief as he finally finds himself back on track. Just as a sudden knock echoed through the empty hall, a voice suddenly echoed from inside the walls, smiling warmly at the protagonist and declaring, "Welcome home." Dak suddenly goes pale, and Colin screams with terror before he can stop him. Later when he settles, Dak tells him the fighter had just passed out from a fight with another guy named Freed. He tells us that Glenn took him home so he could go with Sierra to the doctors, but then they threatened to kill Colin if the patient died. Colin hops up from his mattress, his eyes wide with a sudden burst of energy as he finally realizes why everyone else was so nervous, then immediately says, "Thank you all very much for putting me back to sleep and feeding us food." Dak looked up from the table and grinned at Colin when he finally said, "Thanks, Colonel." Dak was a bit shocked when he learned that Colin could actually say thank you. Colin steps out of the shadows and sees everyone watching like ghosts. A girl named Free heard a loud clatter of shoes behind him, so she stopped and asked the boy how they were doing today. Surprisingly, the girls ran away as if they had spotted a ghost, while Colin blamed it all on Dak's pale and ugly face. Dak shouted after him, accusing him of the broken leg because he wasn't able to go home and keep up with his sleeping wife. The two of them were always fighting, but now a group of guys with big hair walked in and said hello to both of them. The giant Baldy barges in right next to them and starts screaming in a different language just as they begin his own explanation. The guy hit the ground by accident and woke up in a room where everyone was sitting on chairs. He told them they were all still playing the game yesterday, but now the stakes had gone up because someone else was watching. Colin thinks he's lost his mind, but that's because the Baldy told him he was just caught off guard during a last-minute fight between them. He stood ready for this round, knowing his life wouldn't be the same again. The bald man snaps his fingers and tells Colin he's confused by the guy's intentions. But when he tries to explain it further, everything goes still. He turns around to scold his men, telling them they must make the move right after he snaps his fingers. His crew still remembers what happened when they hurt Colin back then, and now they also know about that brutal fight between him and Freed. Therefore, he won't try to do anything rash next time either. You know what happens when Captain sees so many men acting like they don't care? They realize just how spineless they actually are. But while he didn't back down, his ego kept pushing him to grab Dak right there and accuse Freed of cheating on his own behalf. He told Dak that he was coming to free them from the prison so they could go to freedom and get their punishment done. Dak grabbed a hold of him so bad it felt like he'd been punched in the stomach, and as he screamed about his lack of authority over the puncher, the guy stopped trying to hit him back. He shoveled the guy onto the ground right there, leaving him totally stunned. Then, a wave of action followed, as Glenn and his men burst into the air demanding answers about what happened. That morning, they saw Colin and Dak dead and assumed the Elite Knights weren't even playing anymore. The guy who's been acting so rude to Glenn has a serious problem. He's bowing down to him in a way that makes Glenn wonder why anyone would be so polite. A guy sees the trio sneaking into class and decides to fix their behavior before they start teaching them how to behave properly. To his surprise, Colin greeted them with a friendly cheer, but then the Baldy snapped at him and turned on him right out of the blue. Marvin jumps forward and smacks the giant boss right into the air as a quick escape. A guy goes wild when he hears Marvin and Sarah play along with Colin all over again. The Baldy believes he is having a dream and shouts loudly about how the high-ranking servants are cheating while the common ones play games, shouting that this is a total break from all the rules. Sarah turns her attention to telling him that none of Katrina's rules matter when they decide not to follow anything. Sarah gently nudged the boy's head toward her ear, whispering that he must stay quiet so she can see the other ones safely before it hurts. That guy's watching Colin take his squad to the end of the field while he makes fun of him, saying, "I just won again." A group of friends heads down to a tavern to catch up after an adventure. And when Colin finally shows up with his heartfelt thanks, it turns out the guest had already given him the perfect gift back. Glenn whispered to Sarah, "I am your savior," while she joked with him about never liking the game. Dak tries to ask Sarah if he has any past connections to that guy, but his question sparked her anger because she simply won't listen to him talk about it anymore. He then quickly steps away and apologizes, saying he shouldn't have asked such a stupid question. Suddenly, Glenn says to Colin and Dak, "Well, let's see if you're still with us." Dak nearly dropped his mind when he heard that he would be standing so tall. Colin laughs and says, "I'm not actually a knight. I'm just going to do some big things for the world." The trio knew instantly what they were going to do, because that was exactly what the ambitious leader wanted him to achieve. Marvin tells Colin not to be a cocky lord because his victory with a mysterious sword sparked his own doubts. But when Sarah enters, she cuts him off by pointing out he couldn't have been just a wizard, and that the Flame Wolf King was also using magic too. Marvin can't believe it all the time, because someone who used to be treated like trash can never actually get into the world of magic. Glenn started by telling Colin to clarify his mistake, but when Colin realized he was already too anxious about it, the situation quickly became very difficult for him. He had already planned everything perfectly before coming out here. Just as Sarah decided Colin was a former noble right after he laid out his excuse, she jumped up in excitement. Sarah suddenly feels something off about Colin, realizing his whole life has been a cruel nightmare of being forced to be an illegitimate son of a rich man who was never allowed out of the darkroom in which he grew up. Sarah tells Colin she wants him to find every piece of his stuff back at Darius's house. Dak was stunned when Sarah showed her way around the room, yet Colin jumped in front of Sarah's face, saying, "She just happened to look right at me." Sarah felt very sure of what was happening, while Glenn stood up and scolded the high nobles for their own foolish ways. Collins begins telling his fake tale of being once a noble who was kicked out by his own family before he had to become a slave. As the story unfolds, he cries for help, but vows that the rich will pay for their sins. And while Colin's tale moves Marvin and Sarah to tears with sympathy, Dak watches from behind in silent amazement. Sarah and Marvin both fell in love with Colin so badly they couldn't stop believing his crazy tale, which made Dak wonder how it was going to work if Glenn didn't actually get swept up by their fairy tales. To his great embarrassment, Glenn looks so tempted by Colin's tale that he even lets Colin know he'd keep it secret until no one else notices him causing a fuss. He told Colin that he would never let anyone else touch the storm or the beach without first asking permission before stepping into the water. Once again, Glenn tells Colin that Darius asked him to be ready when Darius finally falls asleep. As they part ways, Glenn whispers softly in AE, admitting he still doubts Colin's tale. He wanted Colin to hear that Dak was so surprised because the trick had finally worked out perfectly, which meant he'd been right all along. Colin laughs as he sees I is actually a mix of everything, but then worries that being so distant from Ree will make conducting an investigation much harder. Colin tries to trick Dak into thinking that telling a tale of a noble three-legged crow makes him forget why he's staring at him, so he reluctantly shows him the actual weird sign before Colin asks if he knows about it. It turned out that while Colin was trying to sneak away from the war with Dak, he accidentally cut down an orc so he could give her a sweet message she hadn't received yet. Colin sprinted forward in a panic, yet he was suddenly stopped by a wall of water that shielded him from every blow. He spits a splash that sends Colin tumbling into the deep blue pool right where he was supposed to land. Dak steps down to catch the Orc King mid-ride and whispers, "You're still alive," as the beast tries to claim his glory. As Dak vanished, leaving the Orc King to lose focus, Colin's blade slipped right through his shield. Colin and Dak cut the Orc King to a pulp in one single, brutal move that proved they could handle even the fiercest foes together. Dak slammed his fist into the floor as he saw Colin try to save himself from two orcs who had already cut down one another and argued over how they should have taken their plans. Colin chuckled and said, "Yeah, I'd still be right on my side of the line." Dak had planned to give him a signal before starting to explain why he had to wait for his turn. Colin slammed his hand down hard and screamed, "I cannot even tell you what my plan looks like." The two people were yelling at each other while the hostages watched from a safe distance with wide eyes and complete shock. The day the two brothers began arguing over a small puzzle, they found themselves staring at the sky while Dak held out his hand to make a strange gesture that pointed toward the three-legged crow. When Dak explained that he knew this signal came from a man named Rowan Back in his early days with the Slave Association, it was as if everyone was just watching him for the first time. Dak shouted that the red flag meant he was fishing for his best friends, so anyone who was a fellow human would instantly jump in to help him. Colin's voice rang out while telling himself about how he caught a vague hint of a signal earlier. Yet as the world around him faded into nothingness, he remembered just how stubborn and dear his best friend had been to keep them together. Dak was blown away by the news that he didn't even know who his old friend actually was, so he jumped for joy to hear it. Moments later, the group walks into a long hall and finds Darius standing alone in front of a glass door, his face pale with worry as he waits inside. Darius asked Colin if he was feeling well, but Colin assured him that despite all his bad luck, He was actually in a much better place thanks to you. Darius stepped forward to explain his call about the hunt and why the matter was so important. Dax suddenly panics as he hears the noise, fearing that Darius is going to scold the group for stepping onto the grounds without asking first. Darius stepped forward and smiled, revealing that he spent many years working with Glenn and his crew. And suddenly, that picture hanging above the table looks like an actual portrait of him and his team. Darius tells us that surviving life-or-death battles with his team has forged their unique bond, and it's not just a memory. It's the very foundation of who they are. He admits it can't be taken for granted, yet because those friends saved him from danger, he finally knows exactly why he owes them so much thanks. When Dex says things could have been better by noticing an early sign of trouble, Darius tells them not to worry because it was their duty to predict and stop the monster's assault before it happened. Darius then asked them about hearing that special offer from the Elite Knights, and he wanted to know if anyone had listened to it before. Colin stepped forward, his heart pounding, and with a quick, humble smile, he turned away from the offer entirely. Darius stared at the map and asked Dak for an opinion on where he stood. Dak is completely overwhelmed by the offer, and he starts stuttering talking about how there should be someone more capable. However, Colin cuts in,